So welcome everyone. Yes, hi. My name is Jackie Patterson. I'm with the NAACP as well as Women of Color United. We want to welcome you to our panel on Women of Color and Climate Justice. We're one of our panelists is still coming in, our third panelist, but we're just going to get started out of respect for everyone being here. So, first of all, good morning. Good morning. Hope everyone's enjoyed the CSW so far. I just wanted to give a few opening comments, give you a bit of an overview of the panel, and introduce our panelists, and then we'll just kind of get going. So first of all, why are we even trying to do this panel? The primary reasons are because women of color in the U.S. tend to be somewhat invisible on the global landscape as it relates to the climate justice movement and as a relates to conversations about climate change. We tend to just kind of get buried in being in this country where that's viewed as the land of plenty, and being in this country that's viewed as the biggest emitter, but we don't really kind of see the sub-communities within the U.S. and how we're differentially impacted. So we really wanted to tell that story. So within the U.S., women in general, and communities of color stand to be, or are already being disproportionately impacted by climate change, just like we see around the world. We as communities of color, we as women of color find ourselves in double jeopardy because communities of color are disproportionately impacted and women are disproportionately impacted. So we find ourselves at that kind of nexus of risk and impact. As it relates to the global picture, we feel like there's more that unites us in terms of how the relationship between our differential and disproportionate impact and the impact of women in the global South in particular. Therefore, we want to try to find ways to work together more. There are already ways that we're working together. We want to work together more as women of color and women in the global South. So we'd like to talk about exploring ways that women of color, given our role in the U.S., in the belly of the beast, in terms of how we can use our influence to not only influence U.S. domestic policy for our own survival and well-being, but also influence U.S. foreign policy, and as it relates to just how to change our emissions and also the bad policies that the U.S. is putting out there as it relates to climate change. So this panel is really to kind of tell the stories of women of color, tell the story in terms of differential impact, tell the stories in terms of the current resistance that we're taking, and then also have a conversation with you about how we can work more closely together. So let me just introduce our panelists and then give you a sense of what so we have Nia Robinson, who's sitting right here to my right. She's an advocate for environmental justice, began her advocacy with Detroiters working for environmental justice, Detroit, Michigan, and later switched to sharpen her organizing skills with the nationwide Service Employees International Union, which is a labor union. She is currently the director of the Environmental Justice and Climate Change Initiative, a diverse, consensus-based group of U.S. environmental justice, climate justice, religious, policy, and advocacy organizations and networks working to promote just and meaningful climate policy. Their mission is to educate and activate the people of North America towards the creation and implementation of just climate policies in both domestic and international contexts. As the director of EJCC, Nia's expertise at the intersection of race, class, and climate change is widely sought. She recently co-authored a report examining the impacts of climate change and climate change policy on African Americans, entitled A Climate of Change, African Americans, Global Warming, and a Just Climate Policy in the United States. The importance of including voices of disproportionately affected communities in the creation of just and equitable climate change legislation, which is her work at organizing and mobilizing communities of color, low-income people, and youth in the fight for climate justice. So to Nia's right is Jahan Giron. And unfortunately, she's going to have to give me a tutorial on on pronouncing in English. She is Navajo and African American. She is Bitterwater Clan, and her maternal grandfather is Red Bottom People Clan. And she'll explain more, hopefully. Yes. So Jahan's family is from the community of Old Sawmill in Arizona, right? And she grew up and went to high school close by in Fort Defiance, which is also in Arizona, located on the eastern part of the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. She is a graduate of Stanford University with a Bachelor's of Science in Earth Systems and a focus in energy science and technology. In her position as Native Energy Organizer at the Indigenous Environmental Network, Jahan works to build the capacity of communities throughout the United States and Canada who are impacted by energy development and climate change. Jahan is a member of the steering committee of the Environmental Justice and Climate Change Initiative, NIA's organization, and the coordinating committee of the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. So our panelist who's yet to arrive is Elizabeth Paredo Beltran. She was born in La Paz and graduated social psychologist from the Catholic University of La Paz and works at the Solon Foundation in Bolivia, a recognized institution for its work on human rights, arts, and culture. Elizabeth has worked widely on gender issues, water rights, and international integration. She's written many articles, books, documentaries on gender, ethnicity, and human rights, and water and trade. As an activist, she takes part in international campaigns focused on economic and social justice, the fight against racism, water rights, and for climate justice. Between 1999 and 2003, she coordinated the Committee for the Rights of Domestic Workers in Bolivia. In 2005, she became the director of the Foundation Solon and is the actual editor-director of the Bulletin Tunupa. She's a co-founder of the Bolivian Movement Against Free Trade, FTAA, and belongs to the Women's Net Transforming the Economy and the Women's Committee of the Hemispheric Social Alliance. Among other activists, she promotes an international tribunal on climate justice. So those are our esteemed panelists, and we look very much forward to hearing from them. So the format of our discussion, we're going to have a bit of a roundtable discussion. Hopefully Elizabeth will come soon, so it'll be a bit more round, and then we'll open up for some discussion amongst all of us and talk about a little bit about strategy, about how we can work together, and Anil will wrap us up with some closing comments. So we have 5 questions that I'm going to be presenting to the panel, and then we'll have some conversation around that. So, what brought you to this work on environmental and climate justice?
Like Jackie mentioned earlier, I am from Detroit, Michigan. And growing up in Detroit, I consistently saw communities with extremely poor air quality, extremely high asthma rates, extremely high rates of lead poisoning and aggression amongst young boys, specifically in our school systems. That on top of, the losing of the manufacturing industry and us being home to one of the largest municipal waste incinerators in the world really led me to start to think about why my community looked the way that it did. Why in my great-grandmother's community in Southwest Detroit why was that the highest cancer cluster in the state of Michigan? And so looking at that, I for a long time felt discouraged because I felt like, well, maybe this is just Detroit. And so I started to do a little bit of research and really found out that communities like mine with people that looked like me, also with Latinos, indigenous people, and low-income people all over the country, were facing very similar issues. And that's when I began to work with Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice. Because what I wanted to be able to do was work for the improvement of the environment of my community, and also really for the salvation of the people who were bearing the burden of these issues all over the country and all over the world. Because what it also allowed me to do is really begin to pay attention to the diasporic aspect. And so to look at Black people and African people all over the world and the conditions that we were facing in terms of environmental issues, and really begin to figure out the best way to build solidarity on a diasporic level around this issue.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jahan, as Jackie said.